It's funny how most of us go through life trying to fix ourselves. As if being human automatically means we're defective. We polish our personalities, hide our flaws, and work overtime to look like we've got it all together. But take a second and look at the people who actually made a difference in history. The ones who shifted culture, sparked movements, or inspired generations. You'll notice something they all have in common: every single one of them was cracked in some way. They weren't great despite their pain, they were great because of it. That idea probably goes against everything we've been told growing up in America. We're raised to cover the scars, smile through the pain, and post the highlight reel. But what if the very thing you've been trying to hide, that wound, that failure, that heartbreak, is exactly what the world needs from you? What if your so-called flaw is actually the feature that makes you who you are? Let me clear something up right away. When I talk about being damaged, I don't mean reckless or irresponsible. I'm not talking about someone who uses pain as an excuse to avoid accountability. I'm talking about the ones who've been to the edge. Who've looked into the dark parts of their own mind and somehow made it back. People who know, deep down, that they can't do this life thing completely on their own. Those are the people the universe works through, not because they're weak, but because they're awake. You see, the world has no real use for the self-made man, that classic American myth about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and going it alone. That kind of person is a closed system. There's no room for anything bigger to move through them because they're already full of themselves. But the broken ones, the ones with cracks, they're open. And through those cracks, light can finally get in. Think about water for a second. If you've got a perfectly sealed cup, water can't enter. But if there's even a tiny chip or gap, it seeps through and fills the space. That's how grace works. That's how love, growth, and change find you. They don't enter where everything is perfect. They enter where something's been cracked open. And here's something important: being damaged is not the same thing as being destroyed. A cracked mug still holds coffee. A window with a chip still lets sunlight through, and sometimes the chip bends the light in ways that make it even more beautiful. Your damage doesn't disqualify you from life. It's what qualifies you. Let's look at some of the biggest figures in history, the ones who changed the game in ways that still echo today. None of them were perfect. In fact, most of them were pretty messed up by any ordinary standard. Take Moses. According to the story, the guy could barely speak. He had a stutter and didn't think he was leadership material. Yet he was chosen to deliver one of the most important messages in history, to lead a whole people out of slavery. Why would the universe pick a man who couldn't even talk straight? Because he knew he couldn't do it alone. He wasn't full of ego. He wasn't pretending to be perfect. And that humility made him the perfect vessel for something greater to work through. Or look at David, just a kid with a slingshot, overlooked even by his own family. Everyone thought he was too small, too inexperienced, too insignificant. But that same boy, dismissed as damaged goods, became one of the greatest kings ever known. And even when he wore a crown, he never forgot he was just a shepherd boy the universe decided to use. That's the pattern. Once you start looking for it, you see it everywhere. The people who get chosen, the ones who leave a mark, are almost always the ones who've fallen and gotten back up. Paul, one of the most powerful teachers in early Christianity, used to be the enemy. He literally hunted down and killed the very people whose message he would later preach. Imagine carrying that weight, knowing you destroyed the lives of people you now claim to serve. But instead of letting that guilt crush him, he turned it into awareness. He knew firsthand that goodness doesn't come from your own perfection. It comes from grace, from something bigger than you that forgives, restores, and transforms. And that's what happens when you've been damaged. You lose the illusion of control. You stop believing you're the one running the show. Most people walk around thinking they're in charge of life, that if they just hustle hard enough, stay positive, and plan everything right, it'll all work out. But the ones who've been broken know better. They've felt the ground give way beneath them. They've seen how quickly life can flip the script. And when everything falls apart, they learn something the comfortable never do: they learn to trust what catches them. That's why the universe works through broken people. They've learned to let go. They've stopped fighting the current. They've figured out that life doesn't respond to force, it responds to faith. You ever try to float in a pool? The harder you fight to stay up, the faster you sink. But if you just breathe, loosen up, and trust the water, it holds you. That's how life works too. The damaged person has learned how to float. Here's the thing most people don't realize: your damage isn't the event that happened to you. It's not the breakup, the addiction, the failure, or the loss. Those are just the circumstances. The real damage is what happens inside when you finally admit those experiences changed you. When you realize you're not the same person anymore and you can't go back to who you were before. That moment right there, that's the crack where light gets in. See, most people spend their whole lives trying to get back to normal after something painful happens. They want to rewind to the version of themselves before everything went sideways. But the truth is, there is no back. The old version of you doesn't exist anymore. The damage broke that version open so something new could grow in its place. That's not recovery. That's transformation. And transformation is what life, or the universe, or God, whatever name you use, is really after. You know what's interesting? The people who've never really been broken often struggle the most when things get hard. They're so used to everything being stable and predictable that when chaos hits, they crumble. They're like glass that's never been tempered, beautiful, but brittle. The people who've already been through it, who've been bent out of shape and had to rebuild, they don't snap as easily. They've got flexibility. They've learned to bend without breaking. Like an old oak tree that's survived storm after storm, not because it's unyielding, but because it knows how to sway. When you accept your damage instead of fighting it, something beautiful happens. You stop pretending you're the main character of the story. You realize you're part of something way bigger. That's humility, not the fake kind that says, "Oh, I'm nothing," but the real kind that says, "I'm part of something vast and mysterious, and I don't have to control it all." And that realization? It's freeing. Because once you know you're not in charge of every single outcome, you can finally stop exhausting yourself trying to control everything. You can show up, do your best, and let the rest unfold however it's meant to. Ancient philosophers had a phrase for that effortless action. It doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing what's right in front of you without fighting life at every turn. You stop swimming against the current and start moving with it. The proud, got it all together person is always at war, with people, with life, even with themselves. But resistance is a losing game. The broken person has learned to stop fighting and start flowing. Not because they've given up, but because they've finally made peace with the fact that life isn't something to conquer. It's something to cooperate with. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. Something powerful happens when you've been broken. You start to understand people on a whole new level. You stop seeing them as others and start recognizing yourself in them. Real compassion doesn't come from comfort. It comes from having walked through your own fire. People who've never suffered often don't get it. They look at someone struggling and think, why can't they just get it together? Just try harder. But when you've been in that dark place, when you've hit rock bottom, when you've cried in the car or stared at the ceiling wondering how you'll make it through the next day, you stop judging. You know that sometimes trying harder isn't the answer. Sometimes, the real courage is in surrendering, in admitting you need help and allowing others to help you. That's what real empathy is made of, the kind that doesn't look down on people, but sits down with them. But let's be real, not everyone learns from their pain. Some people let their damage make them bitter, angry, or cruel. They build walls instead of bridges. They use their suffering as an excuse to lash out or shut down. And when that happens, the pain becomes poison, not power. Pain itself isn't the teacher. It's what you do with it that matters. There's a difference between the person who says, "Why me? Life's unfair," and the one who asks, "What is this trying to teach me?" Both have scars, but only one is becoming wise. I once heard a story about a man who went to see a spiritual teacher. He said, "Master, I'm full of problems. I'm anxious. I'm depressed. I've failed over and over again. How can I possibly be of any use?" The teacher smiled and said, "You just listed your qualifications." The man looked confused. So the teacher explained, "Your anxiety has taught you that life is uncertain. Your depression has shown you that happiness can't be forced. Your failures have taught you humility. These aren't weaknesses, they're your credentials. That's the secret right there. The universe doesn't look for perfect people to do meaningful work. It looks for the ones who've been cracked open, because that's where the light shines through. Think of a seed. It has to break open before it can grow. If it stays whole, sealed, and untouched, it never becomes what it's meant to be. The same goes for us. Our cracks, our damage, are what allows something new and beautiful to grow from within. The people who've changed the world, they're never the ones who had it easy. They're the ones who fell down 100 times and got up 101. Struggle has a way of stripping away what's fake, leaving only what's real. And what's real is what the world needs. Here's the beautiful twist in all of this. Once you stop hiding your broken parts, something amazing happens. People recognize themselves in you. Your openness becomes a bridge that lets others cross from loneliness into connection. Because truth be told, everyone is damaged in some way. Everyone's got stories they don't tell, scars they hide, mistakes they wish they could erase. But when you stop pretending to be flawless, you give others permission to stop pretending too. That's when healing starts, not when we act like we've got it all figured out, but when we admit we don't. Real connection doesn't come from perfection. It comes from honesty. The universe doesn't choose people despite their damage, it chooses them because of it. Pain creates humility. Humility opens space. And it's in that space that grace, or call it God, life, the universe, whatever word feels right, can finally move. So if you're sitting there thinking, I'm too broken to matter. I've made too many mistakes. I'm too far gone, let me tell you something straight, you're exactly the kind of person the universe is looking for. Your cracks aren't disqualifications, they're your credentials. Your scars aren't proof that you've failed, they're proof that you've lived. The world doesn't need more perfect people. It needs more real ones. It doesn't need more polished, curated, Instagram-ready versions of humanity. It needs people who've been through it, who've fallen apart and come back together wiser, softer, more open. People who can say, yeah, I've been there and I'm still standing. Perfection doesn't inspire anyone. But authenticity does. The universe isn't waiting for the ones who have it all together. It's waiting for those who are willing to be honest about their mess. Because that honesty, that vulnerability, is how the light gets through. The irony of it all? The very wound you've been trying to hide is the door through which healing enters. The same damage you thought made you useless is what makes you useful. So stop trying to fix yourself. Stop pretending you're supposed to be perfect. Just show up, cracked, chipped, and human. That's enough. Because when you let your cracks show, you don't just heal yourself, you give others permission to heal too. Your openness lights the path for someone else still trapped in the dark. Remember this, the best vessels are the ones that have been broken and repaired. They've been through enough to know they're not the light itself, they're just the thing the light shines through. And the light shines brighter because of those cracks. So be broken. Be honest. Be real. Let your light leak through the places you thought you needed to hide. That's not weakness, that's your power. Because the world doesn't need your perfection. It needs your truth.